On April 7, 2004, NHL forward Mike Danton picked up his phone and made a call that would destroy his career. He was trying to hire a hitman to kill someone he saw as a threat. Federal agents arrested him the next day, and by July, he was sitting in a courtroom pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. The St. Louis Blues center got sentenced to 90 months in federal prison. But he was far from the only NHL player to trade his jersey for a jumpsuit. The NHL sells itself as a league of tough guys who settle their problems on the ice. But over its history, at least 17 players have served actual time behind bars for crimes ranging from drunk driving to drug trafficking to murder plots. Today, we're examining every single documented case where an NHL player went to prison or jail. Some of these stories involve split-second decisions that destroyed careers. Others reveal patterns of behavior that went unchecked for years, and a few showcase remarkable redemption arcs that prove second chances can work. By the way, if you're interested in the hidden history of professional sports, make sure to subscribe because we're uncovering stories the leagues don't talk about. Starting with the most shocking case, Mike Danton was a fourth-line forward for the St. Louis Blues when everything fell apart. In April 2004, federal prosecutors said he tried to hire someone to kill a person he believed was threatening him. The case got complicated with stories about his relationship with his former coach David Frost, but the legal facts were simple. Danton pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in federal court. The judge gave him 90 months in federal prison. He served years in U.S. custody before being transferred to Canada, where he got full parole in 2009. After getting out, he went back to university and even played college hockey again. His case remains one of the strangest in NHL history because it wasn't about a bar fight or a drunk driving accident. It was about trying to contract a killing. The Blues immediately terminated his contract and distanced themselves from their former player. His teammates later said they never saw it coming, describing Danton as quiet and focused on hockey. The case raised questions about the pressures young players face and the influence of advisors and coaches in their lives. Federal prosecutors originally sought a longer sentence, arguing the conspiracy showed premeditation and planning. The courtroom was packed with media when Danton stood to hear his fate, his NHL career ending at just 23 years old. He had offered $10,000 for the hit, and the would-be hitman was actually a police dispatcher who was cooperating with the FBI. After his release, Danton played in Europe and eventually earned a degree in psychology, saying prison taught him about taking responsibility for his actions. Bob Probert might be the most famous enforcer in NHL history, but his toughest fight happened at the Detroit-Windsor border crossing. In March 1989, customs agents found cocaine on him when he tried to cross back into the United States. Federal prosecutors charged him with importing a controlled substance, which could have meant 20 years in prison. In October 1989, a judge sentenced Probert to 3 months in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised release. He served his full prison term and some halfway house time, getting released in February 1990. The conviction messed up his ability to travel for years. He needed special immigration waivers just to play in alumni games in Canada. Probert later talked openly about his addiction struggles before his death in 2010. The Red Wings stuck by him during his legal troubles, but the NHL suspended him indefinitely until his release. His case became a turning point in how the league viewed substance abuse, moving slowly from punishment toward treatment. Probert's struggles continued throughout his career, with multiple arrests and rehab stints, but he remained beloved by fans who saw him as someone fighting demons both on and off the ice. His autobiography, published after his death, revealed the depth of his addiction battles and how they started early in his career, when painkillers for hockey injuries led to harder drugs. The amount of cocaine found at the border was 14.3 grams, worth thousands of dollars on the street. Probert's wife later revealed he suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, likely from his years of fighting, which may have contributed to his substance abuse problems. Rob Ramage was a Stanley Cup champion and former first overall draft pick when his life changed forever on December 15, 2003. He was driving a rental car near Toronto with his friend Keith Magnuson, a Hockey Hall of Famer and former Chicago Blackhawks captain. Ramage lost control of the vehicle and crashed. Magnuson died, and another driver was injured. A jury found Ramage guilty of impaired driving causing death in October 2007. In January 2008, the judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison, which legal experts called unusually harsh for a first-time impaired driver in Ontario. After fighting through appeals while out on bail, his appeal failed in 2010, and he started serving his sentence at Frontenac Institution, a minimum security prison. He got day parole in May 2011 with conditions including no alcohol and mandatory counseling. His sentence finally expired in 2014. The hockey world mourned Magnussen's death deeply, as he was not just a former player, but an ambassador for the Blackhawks who worked tirelessly with their alumni association. Ramage's blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit at the time of the crash. The crash happened after the two had been at a funeral for another former NHL player, and they were driving to catch a flight. Ramage had been doing television commentary work before the incident, but lost all his broadcasting opportunities after the conviction. Craig McTavish played center for the Boston Bruins when he made the worst decision of his life. On January 25, 1984, he was driving drunk in Peabody, Massachusetts when he hit another car. Kim Radley, a 26-year-old woman, died from her injuries. McTavish pled guilty on May 4, 1984 to vehicular homicide and driving under the influence. The judge sentenced him to 1 year in jail, and McTavish actually served the entire year, getting released in May 1985. He's repeatedly expressed remorse and even met with Radley's family. He later became a successful coach and executive, but his case still comes up in debates about whether professional athletes get special treatment from the justice system. The fact that he served a full year suggests the judge didn't go easy on him. The Edmonton Oilers signed him after his release, and he went on to win 4 Stanley Cups with the team. His comeback story divided fans, with some seeing redemption and others unable to forgive the fatal accident. McTavish became the last NHL player to play without a helmet, which some saw as reckless given his history, while others viewed it as unrelated to his past. During his time in jail, McTavish worked in the prison kitchen and later said the experience changed his entire perspective on life and responsibility. Steve Durbano was one of the most penalized players in NHL history during the 1970s, racking up fights with teams like Pittsburgh, St. Louis, the Rangers, and Kansas City. But his real troubles started after hockey. In the early 1980s, Canadian authorities caught him smuggling cocaine. A court convicted him, and he was sentenced to 7 years and served over a year behind bars. After getting out, his life spiraled with health and money problems. His story became a warning about what happens when the fighting stops, but the problems don't. Durbano accumulated over 1,100 penalty minutes in just 220 NHL games, averaging more than 5 minutes per game in the box. Former teammates described him as someone who couldn't turn off the aggression when he left the rink. He died in 2002 at age 50, broke and largely forgotten by the hockey world that once knew his name. Yegor Shibubla played defense for the Vancouver Canucks and represented Czechoslovakia in the Olympics. In 1987, he was at the World Championships in Vienna when Austrian police arrested him. They said he was part of an international heroin smuggling ring, moving drugs from Pakistan through Austria to Canada. In late 1987, an Austrian court found him guilty and sentenced him to 5 years in prison for trafficking heroin. Because this happened after his NHL career, and in Europe, many North American fans never heard about it, but the court records and news reports from the time documented everything clearly. The case shocked the hockey world in Europe, where Bubla was still remembered as an Olympic star who had defected to the West in 1981. The smuggling operation allegedly involved a significant amount of heroin hidden in hockey equipment bags. Tom McCarthy scored goals for the Minnesota North Stars and Boston Bruins in the 1980s, but after retiring, he got involved in a marijuana trafficking operation that crossed the US-Canada border. Authorities on both sides caught up with him, and he served multiple years in prison in both countries for his role in the drug ring. After getting out, he did community work and coaching, warning young players about the dangers of easy money and addiction. When he died, people remembered him as both a talented player and a cautionary tale about life after hockey. McCarthy had been a first-round draft pick with enormous potential, making his fall even more tragic for those who knew him. The trafficking ring he joined moved hundreds of pounds of marijuana and operated for years before authorities shut it down. Patrick Cote played enforcer for Dallas, Edmonton, and Nashville, throwing punches for a living. But in 2014, he walked into 2 banks in suburban Montreal with a very different plan. He robbed them both. When police caught him, he admitted everything and pled guilty. The judge sentenced him to 30 months in prison. Reports at the time mentioned he'd had a serious drug arrest in New York back in 2002, but the bank robbery sentence was specifically for the Quebec crimes. Cote had racked up over 800 penalty minutes in his NHL career, but nothing prepared him for real prison time. He stole about $20,000 total from the two banks, money he said he desperately needed for drugs. Billy Tibbets had already served prison time before he ever played in the NHL. In 1994, when he was 17, he pled guilty to raping a 15-year-old girl. After violating his probation with other crimes, he went to state prison for about 2.5 years, getting paroled in 1999. He then somehow resurrected his hockey career and made it to the NHL with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. His case keeps coming up whenever teams think about signing controversial players, because he was already a registered sex offender when NHL teams gave him a chance. The Penguins faced massive public backlash when they signed him, with many questioning how they could employ someone with his criminal history. Tibbets played just 82 NHL games total, but his case left a lasting impact on how teams evaluate character concerns. Mike McBain played 64 games as a defenseman for the Tampa Bay Lightning in the early 2000s. Years later, in 2012, Las Vegas police arrested him on multiple child sex charges. He took a plea deal, admitting to attempted sexual assault and attempted lewdness with a child. In January 2013, a Nevada judge sentenced him to 4 to 16 years in state prison and lifetime supervision as a sex offender. He'd gone from the NHL to coaching in minor pro leagues, but now he was heading to Nevada State Prison. The victim was under 14 years old, making the charges especially serious under Nevada law. Patrick Bordelot played forward for the Colorado Avalanche, but in 2020, a Montreal court convicted him of defrauding his ex-partner. The case involved what the court called abusive financial deception that cost her about 63,000 Canadian dollars. The judge sentenced him to 5 months in jail plus 3 years of probation and orders to pay the money back. Because it was a domestic case and not sports-related, it got more coverage in French-Canadian media than in the broader NHL press. Now, let's talk about the players who serve jail time, which is different from prison. Jail is usually for shorter sentences in county or local facilities, while prison is for longer sentences in state or federal facilities. The distinction matters legally even if the experience of being locked up feels similar to those serving time. Dino Ciccarelli is in the Hockey Hall of Fame, but he's also in the criminal record books. On January 6, 1988, during a game at Maple Leaf Gardens, Ciccarelli hit Toronto rookie Luke Richardson with his stick. This wasn't just a penalty, it was assault. Prosecutors actually charged him criminally, which almost never happens for on-ice incidents. Ciccarelli pled guilty to assault, and the judge sentenced him to 1 day in jail plus a fine. He served that single day behind bars, making him probably the only Hall of Famer with a criminal conviction for something that happened during an NHL game. The case set a precedent that on-ice violence could result in criminal charges, though prosecutors rarely pursued such cases afterward. Mark Bell played forward for teams like Chicago, San Jose, and Toronto. In 2006, he was driving drunk when he hit another car and fled the scene. In 2007, he pled no contest to DUI and hit and run. The judge sentenced him to 6 months in Santa Clara County Jail, which he arranged to serve during the 2008 offseason so he wouldn't miss any games. This showed how criminal sentences and NHL schedules sometimes get worked around each other. Bell's blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit when he crashed. Nikolai Khabibulin was one of the best goalies of his era, winning a Stanley Cup with Tampa Bay. But in 2010, Arizona police pulled him over and found his blood alcohol level was way over the legal limit. Arizona has strict extreme DUI laws, and Khabibulin got convicted. The judge sentenced him to 30 days, split between 15 days in jail and 15 days of house arrest with work release. He served the time and then went back to playing. His blood alcohol level was 0.164, more than twice Arizona's legal limit. Slava Voinov won 2 Stanley Cups with the Los Angeles Kings, but in October 2014, his wife ended up in the hospital with injuries, including cuts and blood coming from her ear. Police arrested Voinov for domestic violence. In July 2015, he pled no contest to misdemeanor corporal injury to a spouse. The judge sentenced him to 90 days in county jail, plus probation and community service. He got released after about 45 days because of good behavior credits. The case also triggered immigration problems that ended his NHL career in North America. The Kings terminated his contract, and he eventually returned to play in Russia's KHL. Police reports described how Voinov allegedly pushed his wife into a flat-screen TV during an argument at their home. Alex Galchenyuk was a 3rd overall draft pick who played for teams like Montreal and Arizona. In July 2023, Scottsdale police arrested him after a chaotic incident involving threats and multiple misdemeanors. He pled guilty to misdemeanor threatening under a deal that dropped 5 other charges. The judge sentenced him to 30 days in jail but suspended 27 of them if he completed an alcohol program. With credit for time served, he only had to serve 2 more days. Sean Avery was famous for agitating opponents on the ice, but in 2019 he got in trouble for ramming his scooter into a car door in a Manhattan bike lane. The case went to trial in 2022, and a judge found him guilty of attempted criminal mischief. But since he'd already spent some time in custody when arrested, the judge sentenced him to time served, meaning he didn't have to go back to jail. Looking at all these cases together, some patterns jump out. In the 1980s and 90s, most prison sentences came from cocaine and alcohol incidents. Probert's federal case, Durbano's smuggling, and the drunk driving deaths from McTavish and Ramage all happened in that era. Back then, you usually needed a serious outcome like a death or major drug trafficking to get prison time instead of just probation. The NHL was different then too, with less structure around player support and substance abuse programs. Teams often looked the other way until arrests happened, and the league's response was usually just suspension without addressing underlying problems. The Players Association didn't have the resources or programs they do now for helping troubled players. The line between jail and prison often comes down to legal technicalities more than the actual experience. McTavish served a full year in a Massachusetts jail, which feels like a prison sentence, even though technically it was jail time. That's why some of these cases blur together, even though the facilities were different. International cases created extra complications. Bubla's prosecution in Austria and Danton's federal case with Canadian parole oversight showed how crossing borders made everything more complex. Players ended up in unfamiliar legal systems with immigration problems on top of criminal charges. Recent cases tend toward shorter local sentences or suspended time on misdemeanors, often with treatment requirements. Galchenyuk's 2-day sentence and Avery's time-served verdict show how the system handles lower-level crimes differently now, especially when substance abuse is involved. Courts recognize addiction as a disease more than they did decades ago, leading to more treatment-focused sentences. It's worth noting what this list doesn't include. Danny Heatley's car crash that killed teammate Dan Snyder resulted in probation and community service, but no jail time. Todd Bertuzzi's attack on Steve Moore and Marty McSorley's stick attack on Donald Brassier both led to criminal convictions, but only probation, not incarceration. Those cases were serious, but didn't result in time behind bars. The NHL doesn't keep an official list of players who've been to prison. These 17 cases come from court records, newspaper reports, and documented sources. There might be other brief county jail stints from decades ago that never made national news, but these are all the cases with clear public documentation. Some of these players found redemption after serving their time. Mike Danton went to university and played college hockey. Craig McTavish became a successful coach and general manager. Others struggled to rebuild their lives after prison. The one constant is that every case represents a moment when someone's worst decision caught up with them. Hockey culture celebrates toughness and fighting, but these cases show what happens when violence and poor choices happen off the ice. Unlike a 5-minute major penalty, criminal convictions don't disappear when the game ends. They follow players for the rest of their lives, showing up in background checks, visa applications, and Wikipedia pages. The NHL has gotten better at addressing substance abuse and providing mental health resources for players. But these 17 cases remind us that professional athletes aren't immune from making terrible decisions or facing serious consequences. Behind every mugshot was someone who once heard crowds cheering their name, and behind every sentence was a judge who didn't care about their statistics or Stanley Cup rings. These stories serve as warnings for current players and reminders that fame and money don't protect you from the law. When the arena lights go out and the uniform comes off, NHL players are just people who can make catastrophic mistakes like anyone else. The difference is their failures end up documented forever, turning cautionary tales into permanent records that outlast any highlight reel.